I'm going to go ahead with the meeting beginning ritual. 起立，面向佛堂，参加先鞠躬，一鞠躬，再鞠躬，三鞠躬，参加各位的传世一鞠躬，开班一鞠躬，请坐。Chapter 72, as you may recall, we went through in greater detail. We divided it up into two main parts, and each parts, the first half and the second half, each has subdivisions. So in the first half in particular, the 6 lines can actually be divided into 3 sets of 2 lines each. And overall, it's talking about the people or the relationship, the connection between the ruler and the subjects. And we extrapolate that to also be referring to the relationship that you create, that you initiate, create, and maintain with the people around you. So think of yourself as being at the center of your own universe, the center of your social circle. So think of that as being analogous to the ruler, and think of all the people that you deal with. You have to come up with a good way to govern or to manage your life, so to speak. And then at the bottom, the second half is going to go into how the sages apply the teachings of the Tao, how they behave, how we should emulate them in what they do and the way they think. So that's the quick overview. Now, we managed to get roughly halfway through. Let me remind you from the halfway point what we talked about before. So in line 4, we have this line that says, do not reject their livelihood. So traditionally, this has been problematic for people who write about the Tao Te Ching to explain in a satisfactory way. Most of the time, they have no access to the ancient commentaries written in Chinese that do explain this line in total clarity. So do not reject their livelihood. This is really talking about, from the ruler's perspective, whether or not the ruler really has an appreciation or understanding for what normal everyday people have to go through just to survive. So I have taken that line 4, and I am highlighting that line. And last time we talked about how the un-Tao-like taking privilege for granted could be exemplified by the quote, "Let them eat cake," from just before the French Revolution, when the last Queen of France was said to have not understood the plight of the common people, that when they were stricken by poverty and they had no access to bread, she said the line, "Let them eat cake." So in the so what that meant was that the queen had no understanding of how people lived, and so if they didn't have bread, well, hey, well, couldn't they just have cake instead? She did not understand that they didn't have anything, and if they didn't have any bread, then it's even less likely that they will have any cake. So a couple of things about that. Number one, as my friend Miguel pointed out, the original the original sentence in French, what actually wasn't cake. It was actually an enriched kind of bread that's sort of cake-like. So it's a richer pastry. Now the translation, "Let them eat cake," the point, it's such a popular part of our culture that it's pretty much stuck. And there is no satisfactory translation of that very enriched kind of French bread. So "let them eat cake" has stood the test of time in that regard. The other thing that was not historically accurate was that actually Queen Marie Antoinette never actually said "let them eat cake." It was attributed to her incorrectly. It was actually from a book. that was written by someone, a writer during her period of time, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He wrote about this great princess who said, "Let them eat cake." So that was just to straighten things, keep the record straight. But the point stands. The point is that, well, the rich and powerful tend to lose touch with reality. That is, they don't understand what most people go through. So the example, a more contemporary example that I gave, a true story, not misattributed to anything or anyone, was that an ex-president, when he was, touring a grocery store, a supermarket, he did not know what a scanner was. He did not know the process. He was curious about that. Hey, what is it? Well, people do that, all the time. They scan the groceries, they calculate the amount of money they owe, they pay, etc. Well, because of the privileged life that he led, he never had to do any of that. So he had no idea what people go through. So a much more contemporary example. So this is about the difference between the privilege encountered by the ruler and the lack of privilege of the common everyday people. So I hope you take that point. So the important thing to keep in mind is that, in general, it's part of human nature to get used to privilege. Certainly, it was the same for rulers of ancient times. Certainly, it's true. The more contemporary example that I just cited, that this ex-president of the United States had no idea about the grocery shopping process. When you live in privilege, it becomes like air. You don't really notice that it's there until it's taken away. You don't notice that air is present until you don't have any air. You can't breathe. Then it becomes extremely important. So you take it for granted and you regard privileged status as normal. So another way that I can extend this is that I know many people listening in have exceptional minds. That is, we have many people of above average intelligence, and some of you are positively brilliant. So if you do not know the Tao, you have come to accept this as normal. And therefore, when you think of yourself as, when you regard the above average intelligence that you have as normal, then other people of average intelligence or lower, you begin to see them and treat them with contempt. So that's one thing to watch out for. Is very much part of the ego management process that, as I have said before, is probably the most difficult challenge in life. If you find yourself thinking that way, that is, regarding others with contempt, they cannot think as well as you can, they don't know as much as you know, they cannot react as quickly as you can, they're not the sharpest tools in the shed, etc. When that is the case, just remember, what if that wasn't the way it is in the world? What if they are not below you? What if all these people are not below you in terms of their intelligence or their knowledge or both, but above you, perhaps even far above? Then who is the idiot? Who is the one who receives the contempt? Well, it will be you. So what is it that you did to deserve that privilege, the privilege of being brilliant? Well, you haven't done anything. It was given to you as a blessing or a gift. You didn't actually deserve it. And if it wasn't for the fact that all these other people are below you, you would not be regarded as being above. In the Tao, in chapter 2 of the Tao Te Ching, we learn that whenever there is a high, there is a low. Whenever there is an up, there is a down. So if it weren't for the presence of the people out there that you scorn so much, you would not be considered brilliant at all. You should actually be thankful for them, and you should actually regard them with much more compassion than you usually do. So this is the way, this is the Tao of awareness when it comes to privilege. I'm going to have a lot more to say about that, you guys, because when it comes to a discussion of privilege, it's one of those sensitive topics that set people off. And I will explain why people get set off. But let's stick to the Dao De Jing for the moment and talk about line 5, because ruler does not reject them. That is, the ruler understands the people, the ruler understands what people go through, understand how they live, and therefore he accepts and he identifies, he can empathize with them. So the point that I want to make is that it takes unusual intelligence and sensitivity, or the authentic Tao, or perhaps a combination of all of the above, to recognize this common weakness that we have. It's very common because all of us get used to privilege, all of us take it for granted, and all of us begin to regard privilege status as normal. So in this chapter, in Tao Te Ching 72, we have 3 different ways to apply this idea. For the ruler, it means being able to understand the perspective of the subjects, as we have just mentioned. What about for you? What about you as the ruler of your private cosmos, the ruler of your own, the center of your own universe? So in social interactions, what this teaching means is your awareness of the different levels of privilege. That is, you see your own privilege clearly, you understand them, you are grateful for them, you don't take them for granted, you don't assume that they're normal, and for those who lack privilege, you have the understanding and the empathy, the different levels. And for internal cultivation, this is just you by yourself now. This is you alone. This is the internal, mental, spiritual landscape within yourself. In internal cultivation, this means self-awareness, that is, knowing, understanding yourself. Okay, so as I mentioned, whenever the subject of privilege comes up, it's likely to receive a very negative reaction. So in general, whenever the topic occurs, people will react first with denial. So I'm going to come back to that. I'm going to talk about in just a moment. People react with denial, sometimes discomfort. That is, any talk of privilege or their privileged status makes them very comfortable, very uncomfortable. Then they can react with anger. You know, what are you talking about? Privilege? I'm not privileged. It goes from denial to flashes of anger. Then there's even the possibility of rage. People fly into a rage whenever the subject of privilege comes up. That's because they get defensive and they assume that whenever the subject comes up, that they are about to be accused of having too much privilege, they are about to be put through a guilt trip, and they resent that. Therefore, they fly into a rage. So that's a quick description of what happens when we talk about privilege. So in order to, when I wanted to approach this topic, I wanted to do so in a way that was more indirect and not just talk about it, because then people will go, okay, shields up. You know, I'm not listening anymore. I am now in my defensive elements. Put up my barriers. You know, put up my my force field. So now from here on, everything that you say is going through a filter. I'm not really listening to you. I'm going to resist what you're saying. And that is the reason why I used a different example of privilege. I used Singapore as my example. Like the United States, it's a very multicultural society. The makeup, the composition of Singaporean society is different from that of North America. And so I listed out the people who are there. Now, the majority of the people in Singapore are ethnically Chinese, and therefore, what they call normal food is Chinese food. So I talked about how, you know, someone from a
non-mainstream culture comes into the United States, a little kid can have the lunch that he takes to school made fun of. Ew, what is that? What is that? That little kids have never seen anything other than a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, or like a banana, or maybe a ham and cheese sandwich. So they single out the kid from the different culture and make fun of him, or ostracize him, alienate him, etc. Now, when I bring that up, it isn't to enact social justice or to lay a guilt trip on anybody. Well, I bring it up for a more in-depth discussion. So those of you who have seen the television comedy Fresh Off the Boat, you know that this particular issue was prominently featured in the premiere episode from season 1, and when it aired, many people from that same background as the main character, Eddie Yang, they all went online. They all said that, yep, I had that experience. Yep, I was that little kid. I was the one who was made fun of, for the lunch that I was bringing to school. Now, what happened to the main character, Eddie? Now, remember, the show was based on the biography of an actual living, breathing human being, someone who's still very much alive and well today. Now, he did not. Now, he could have reacted in shame, and he could have rejected his own background. But what he did instead was that he embraced it. Rather than to reject, he embraced, he accepted, and in fact, he was more into the food of his original culture than ever. And this indirectly led to him opening up a very successful restaurant in the East Coast that is doing extremely well, that has received extremely favorable reviews, and actually is a big part of his current celebrity that he enjoys. So here's the question. What makes you different? What makes you ostracized? It could be that when you talk about, yeah, I've been reading up about the Tao, and I enjoy this Asian philosophy, and it's really helping me out. And other people from a different background, they're sort of like, well, I don't know about that. That can't be the truth. That can't be real. That can't be good for you. You need to come back. You need to come back to our group. You need to come back to our church. We will show you the right way. So they too can alienate you. They too can ostracize you. What is your difference that makes you stand out, that causes you to be on the receiving end of that? So in any society, the quote unquote, the normative part, the majority, they have the privilege. They assume everything that they do to be normal, and you will then suffer the disadvantage of not having that exact same privilege. But then what you do can be similar to what Eddie Yang did in Fresh Off the Boat. That is, you can embrace your difference. You can embrace that which makes you different and special and unique. You can maximize on that, and you can do something cool with it. And you can succeed, as the main character of Fresh Off the Boat has, with your own thing, doing your own thing, being great at it, and eventually receiving praise and success and joy because of it. So that's the reason, that's one of the several reasons why I wanted to bring up this topic, is to have everyone do a very intimate self-examination to understand about yourself. Do not, and I'll talk about this again, do not react in the usual way. What privilege? I don't have any privilege. I worked hard all my life. I have no privilege. Do not react with denial. That's what everyone does. If you want to have a life that's extraordinary, do not react to things in the ordinary expected ways. Be different. So that's the first part of it. It brings us to our first break today. Well, actually our only break, our 5-minute break, our mid-meeting break. Let's go ahead and take 5. Okay, let's move on in the discussion about privilege. So in Singapore, normal holidays are Chinese holidays. And for me, that brings to mind how in North America, sometimes when people say things like, you know, happy holidays instead of Merry Christmas, they get a pushback because basically there's a substantial group of people who want to hold on to Christmas. They feel like Christmas is under attack. And then it goes on. Common standard of beauty. That's why I have the picture there of the beautiful models. That's the kind of advertising that you see. Product normalization. I want to go into this one in greater detail in the next slide. No barriers in job interviews, no barriers in dating, etc. Let me talk about product normalization for just a moment. Last time I used the example of foundation, you know, skin color, etc. I have, I think, a better example that I want to introduce you to. So let me tell you the story about this lady by the name of Rachel Marie Stone. Who is she? Well, she is a Christian author, and she has spent quite some time in Africa with her husband and kids. She went there. She traveled there with her family to engage in humanitarian work. So there's nothing quite like traveling abroad, especially to some of these parts of the world where people have far less than we do over here. There's nothing quite like that to really bring you face to face to the understanding of what it means to have privilege. Because in some parts of the world, the lack of privilege means that you can die from things that are very easily taken care of over here. That's reality. That's the way our world still lives today. So let me tell you her story just a little bit at a time. She's a Christian author who has written about her experience in Africa. So when she was there, she wrote about this experience that one day she saw a little girl from the nearby tribe. So little girl is only 8 years old, and she likes to come over and watch the boys play soccer. This particular day, Rachel noticed that the little girl had a cut on her toe. That part of the skin peeled off and was glistening. There was a little bit of bleeding, and so Rachel didn't really speak the tribal language, so she gestured, she pointed, and the little girl, the 8-year-old girl, pointed to the place where she had her injury. And then Rachel realized that it's very common, you know, when you're in that part of the world to have cuts and bruises that just go completely untreated. People just leave it alone and just let it heal up by itself. Sometimes it can get infected because the place, you know, there might be places that are not sanitary. So she wanted to fix it for her. So she gestured, she acted out what she wanted to do to fix up her wound, and so the little girl understood and nodded. So Rachel went and got her first aid kit. So she cleaned the wound, which is on the toe of the little girl, the 8-year-old girl. She cleaned it and she applied, antibiotic, antibacterial ointment on it just to treat it. And then she brought out the Band-Aid, to Band-Aid her up. So then Rachel realized that the little girl was surprised by the Band-Aid because she had never seen anything like that before. So this caused Rachel to have an epiphany. So first of all, this little girl's walking around every day without shoes, like most of the kids in that area. And in fact, many of the adults also did not have shoes. But the idea was that when you're at a certain level of extreme poverty, having kids wear shoes was considered to be a waste because little kids are going to grow out of shoes very quickly. So why even bother? Wait until they're grown and then get shoes. And sometimes even the adults don't have shoes. So we see little kids around here in our world running around with shoes on. We don't really think a second thought about it. We don't realize that in many parts of the world, that's not normal. That's not the case. And shoes is what would have protected the little 8-year-old girl from having an injury on her toe. She didn't have that. And and I know that in the world in which we live, most moms have access to first aid. They'll bring out the first aid kits. They will disinfect the wound. They will bandage her up. They will bring out the Band-Aids. Well, over there, that's not the case. So when people get hurt, they just let it go. Just don't think about it. After a few days, it's going to scab over. It's going to heal up. Hopefully, it's not going to be infected with anything. And then life goes on. So there's another difference between privilege and lack of privilege. And there's more. When she put the Band-Aid on the child, she noticed how it stood out like a sore thumb. And this is because the 8-year-old girl is very dark. She's very dark complected. Her skin, not only is it like 80% brown, it's also really toughened, roughed, because it's exposed to the elements all the time, like most of the people there. So, they age quickly because they're exposed to the sun, the wind, the rain, everything. So that's yet another difference between a world of privilege and a world without privilege. So she wrote about this. No shoes, seen as normal there, but here having shoes is seen as normal. Skin that's constantly exposed to the elements, like, do you suppose they have sunblock? Of course not. They have probably no concept of sunblock. And wounds that are left untreated, if you get hurt, well, too bad for you. Hope it heals up pretty soon. Do what you can, and just don't think about it. Yeah, it's kind of painful, but after a while, it's going to go away. You have momentary discomfort. Sorry about that, but nothing is done to really protect the wound. Not only that, but numerous preventable diseases, because chances are, in areas of extreme poverty and suffering, there's no sanitation to speak of. So you can easily catch something. Malnutrition, while there may not be a whole lot to eat, right? So, and we have seen this. We have seen this in areas of strife, chaos, where little kids have to go hungry at night. So we don't see that as normal over here. Here, the norm is having way more calories in your intake than you actually need. So a lot of food gets wasted. And when there is something to eat, this is another lack of privilege. When there is something to eat, you cannot always be sure that it's good, or that it's not rotten, that it's safe to eat. So you can have the trots, you can have diarrhea, and even more than that, you can die from it. So in our world, when was the last time that anyone died from diarrhea? But in that world, in the world without privilege, it's a rather common occurrence, more common than we like to think. So for Rachel, putting the Band-Aid on an 8-year-old little girl was a moment of epiphany. She realized that, this Band-Aid sticks out like a sore thumb because it was made for Caucasian skin, like hers. So Even though it doesn't exactly match her skin tone, it's close enough so it doesn't get noticed. But on the little girl, it really stood out. So that's actually another privilege. And it became, for her, the symbol. A little Band-Aid is the symbol of privilege. Think about that. Such a simple little thing. Something that we take for granted, don't we? And yet something that certain people, like this little girl, had never seen. So when I talk about product normalization, even the color of Band-Aid is one of those things that get normalized to the majority group. And yet another thing that gets normalized is the stories that we tell ourselves, the fantasy stories, the fairy tales. Those get normalized to the group that has the privilege. So this is the reason why, and by the way, let me also point out that things are very different. Things are continuing to evolve even in our world. So things today are different than they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Things are different now. It's becoming more and more multicultural all the time, like it or not. So let me talk about Disney. How can Disney play into this normalization, this privilege that I'm talking about? Is this a completely different topic? No, it's the same topic. One of my favorite movies from Disney is The Princess and the Frog. The Princess and the Frog. Great story, clever story. It incorporates New Orleans culture. I won't give away the ending. That's a big part of it. I love that movie. I love those characters. But that movie got pushed back from some people who were not happy that the main character did not, to them, seem like a princess because of her complexion. So I want to say it's a new world. So everybody has to begin to understand that princesses come in all shades, all complexions. And I also want to say that, hey, listen, guys, you've already seen this many times. This is not something new, okay? Everybody remembers Aladdin and Princess Jasmine, okay? Well, she's from the Middle East, okay? And a lot of people are directing their dislike or their suspicions or their negative feelings toward people from the Middle East, but listen, she's one of the Disney princesses. And what about other depictions of many female characters that are also not the European princess archetype? Well, there's Pocahontas. And since we're talking about the Tao, you can probably guess the next and last one is going to be Mulan. Okay, so these are all strong female characters from the Disney repertoire that are not necessarily conforming to a very narrow definition of what a princess ought to be. And by the way, because I talk about this all the time, the Mulan character in North American culture, she has a surname, of course, and her surname is written as Fa, F-A, Fa Mulan. Well, in Mandarin, it's actually Hua Mulan. So the actual Mandarin pronunciation is Hua Mulan. The reason why it ended up being Fa is because that's probably a variant from regional dialect. So most people don't realize this, but what we think of as Chinese culture is in fact a regional culture. And that's because the vast majority of the immigrants, the early immigrants into North America have been from the southern provinces of China. So you're really seeing just a regional culture that is not exactly the mainland culture that incorporates all the regions. So Hua Mulan, not Fa Mulan. That's actually a mistake, but it's a mistake that's been so long, it's pretty much stuck. It's just like when you think of Chinese New Year, you probably hear 刚会发财. And again, that's not Mandarin. In Mandarin, that would be 恭喜发财. So again, you're getting a regional dialect. And you know, a great point for my friend Kevin about Shrek, you know, Princess Fiona. That's and by the way, that's not Disney, but it's a fairy tale. So I want to say that you know, princesses can include the green complexion. Good point, Kevin. Thank you. Well, let's move on. So I want to reiterate this. The Tao is about awareness. It's not about guilt trip. It's not about social justice. So the most common reaction by far when the subject of privilege comes up is denial. And I want you to not be ordinary. I want you to be different than almost everyone else. So we're here, and by the way, I'm not here to. My purpose is not to pump everybody up. You know, you are great, you are perfect. The world is your oyster. Go get them, boy. No, that's not the Tao. I am here about expanding our thoughts, our minds, our spirituality, expanding awareness. So this is all about that. This is the reason why I'm talking about this particular topic. I knew that it was going to be challenging. I want to invite you to, when it comes to privilege, think of the yin and yang symbol. And in case you forget what it looks like, here's what it looks like. How do we use the yin and yang symbol? Well, first of all, when you look at one side of it, whether it's the yin side or the yang side, yin contains yang, yang contains yin. That's a teaching right there that says that nobody is any one thing. No matter how much purity you possess in one particular attribute, there's always an element of its complement. So you are not any one thing. So for the people who tell me, I've had no privilege, you know, I grew up poor and I had to fight for everything I have. Nobody helped me. I'm completely self-made. I'm gonna say no. Even the people who are listening in right now, I don't really know you, and I don't know the people who are going to be watching the YouTube video when we record this. I may not know you, but I know this about you. I know that you are not any one thing, and that's because of the yin and yang symbol telling me that there's always different elements of many different things inside of you. So, number one, you are a multitude. You are not one thing. So you are not someone who's lacking in privilege. Well, you are, but at the same time, you are also someone who has privilege. So at the same time, you possess privilege and you lack privilege. You can probably think of all kinds of examples in your life right now, examples where you possess privilege and examples where you lack privilege. Why? Because of this. You are a multitude. So if you don't remember, use the yin and yang symbol to help you recall that to mind, and recall that you have both advantages and disadvantages, privileges and a lack of privilege. And from that point on, you want to extend a little bit further and think about how you ought not take the privileges that you've enjoyed for granted. And you ought not let the disadvantages that you've had in your life defeat you. That would be the awareness of the Tao. And lastly, you want to be aware of how it is for other people. They too have a different set of advantages and disadvantages, privileges, and also situations where they lack the privilege of the mainstream, perhaps, or the privilege of the favored. So you want to be sensitive to that You want to be aware of it so you can empathize with it and understand other people better, to be able to relate to them, identify with them. That is the Tao of awareness. That's really what I want to get into with this talk of privilege and Disney princesses, of course. All right, so when you can work your way from outright denial, what privilege? I don't have any privilege, to acceptance, then you are making progress. Acceptance leads to harmony. Let's examine how this works for the three paradigms that we look at for this chapter. For the ruler, well, for the ruler to understand the subject, it will lead to happy subjects, and that lead to a prosperous kingdom. So even though I say that I am not out for social justice, I'm out for expanded awareness, if enough people in our society have their awareness expanded, then the natural byproduct is more fairness and more justice for everybody. Same idea. Okay, so what about social interactions? Well, having that harmony means that people can come together and work toward the common goal. When you can unite people like that, you become a very powerful entity, far greater than any individual person. What about for yourself? In self-management, the lack of internal conflicts, which is what peace of mind is all about, and it also makes you much more efficient in that you are no longer wasting time wrestling with a deep inner divide. Okay, so we're moving on now to line 7. This is talking about the sages. I touched on this last time. This is the pivot that makes you aware that, hey, we're not really talking about the kingdom and the subjects and the ruler and whatnot. We're really talking about you, me, the sages, everybody. And it's actually not talking about how to govern. It's actually talking about how to manage your life, how to rule your own kingdom is the way that I put it. So we know from previous lines, the sage and you, hopefully, Tao cultivators, sages do not limit themselves or other people. They understand what people need, not just what they want. And what else? Okay, so let's talk about what else. The sages understand themselves. They cultivate self-awareness. This is what they work on. So now this sentence, I think, makes more sense. They do not accept privilege as normal. They become aware of them, so they have something to be grateful for. And then I single out this character, jian, which in Mandarin means to see, but here in line 8, it means to be seen rather than to see, or to be displayed so that it can be seen. So this whole line 8, is talking about how the sages, they know themselves and they don't put themselves on display. They don't glorify themselves, in other words. So the first character is self, and this character, as I said, as I pointed out in the previous slide, is to see in modern Mandarin. So when you put it together, it gets mistranslated as self-see or see themselves. And therefore, the mistranslation can be, therefore the sages know themselves but do not see themselves. Okay, well, that doesn't even make any sense. So what it actually means, self-display, showing off yourself, let yourself be seen. This is why I have previously talked about how I am against you dyeing your hair a different color. especially if it was green or purple or pink. And that's because when you do so, you want to be seen. There's an element of ego in place. So if you are dyeing your hair for other reasons, and you could, for instance, not want to draw attention to yourself if you are prematurely gray, and therefore you dye it a darker shade so as to not draw attention. That I can see is perfectly congruent with the Tao. So there are reasons that you will want to do that. Dyeing your hair is also not any one thing. It's not all bad. It could be useful sometimes. I'm just saying that when you dye a very unconventional color, like a day glow orange, okay, well then I know your purpose is to be seen. I know your purpose is to attract attention to yourself. Then I have to be honest with you and tell you that, well, in the Tao that I study, that is specifically pointed out as being contrary to the behavior of the Tao sage. Can you even imagine a Tao sage who dyes his hair bright blue? It's just not going to happen. Now let's go to line 9. We just talked about line 8. Now let's go to line 9. Line 9 starts out with the character for self and then goes into the character for love. So together, self-love. Self-love in the Tao context has more to do with self-respect. That is, valuing yourself rather than to overly praise yourself. So let me talk about that. When we talk about self and love in the Western context, we oftentimes get into this whole idea of too much self-love, self-admiration, which is narcissism. It's all about, and I spelled that with an extra U, sorry about that, spelled that incorrectly. It's all about excessive fascination and admiration of oneself. So in the Tao, it's all about balance and moderation. So you should only have a moderate level of self-possession, healthy regard for yourself. So you don't go overboard with that, fall in love with yourself as Narcissus did in Greek mythology. So who was Narcissus? That's where we get the word narcissism. That is Narcissus. This is so there are many classical paintings devoted to Narcissus watching himself, looking at his own reflection in the water. Narcissus is a hunter. He was born as an exceptionally beautiful boy who will grow up to be, this is like the ancient equivalent, the ancient mythological equivalent of our modern male models. So he would grow into this handsome youth, and people loved him because he looked so good. And he was always very disdainful of the people that loved him so much. So that disdain brought him into conflict with various people, including a goddess by the name of Nemesis. And there was a nymph who fell in love with him, and that nymph tried to protect him. So Nemesis lured him to water. Now Narcissus, having never seen his own reflection before, suddenly sees a very beautiful youth in the reflection of the water, became fascinated, admired it, fell in love with it, and could not bring himself to leave. So the nymph tried to warn him. Unfortunately, the nymph could not talk. And this was because previously the nymph in mythology had tried to protect Zeus, and therefore incurred the wrath of the queen Hera, Zeus's wife. So Hera, this goddess, made the nymph able to say only the last word that was uttered by someone else. And this nymph's name is Echo. This is how we get echo. So when you say anything to echo, she repeats back the last word. That's it. So today, as we enjoy this product called Amazon Echo, probably a lot of us don't know that actually the name of echo had a very ancient Greek mythological origin. So his mother raised him without mirrors because there was a prophecy that if he was to see himself, it will bring about disaster. And Nemesis, the goddess, looked into a pool when he saw his own reflection and became transfixed. Echo, the nymph who loved him, could not save him. So from this mythological tale, we also ended up with Nemesis, which is the word for the enemy who intends to exact retribution upon you. So all these different things that we get from ancient Greek mythology, it's absolutely fascinating. So by the pool, Narcissus transformed into a flower, the flower called Narcissus, flower named after him. And that flower, you know, when it's planted by a body of water, regards its own reflection in the water. So let's talk about praising oneself. So in modern Mandarin, the two characters are self and value. So valuing yourself in this context means to value yourself too much so that you praise yourself. It's an overinflated sense of value. So I mentioned this last time without getting to any examples, but I want to give you guys some examples now. So we see this a lot, especially in social media. This is the practice known as humble brag. What is humble brag? This is a new word. It means that you seem to be trying to express humility, but you're actually bragging. So it's a humble brag. So what are some examples? Well, there are many examples. It took no effort at all for me to find examples from social media. Let me share them with you. A few examples. Someone who participated in the contest. Oh, the other contestants are so much more talented than I am. I have no idea how I won. What is the purpose of that? Hey, everybody, I won, right? But you don't want to say that without appearing to be arrogant. Therefore, you go, oh, well, they're all so much more talented than I am. So see how humble I am? But I won. Hey, I won. So that's the humble brag right there. And another one from a lady. And, you know, she starts with like, oh my God, guys kept hitting on me at the bar. And my boyfriend was like right there. I mean, really? Come on. What's she trying to say? Look how attractive I am. Right? So she's trying to not make it seem, she doesn't want to say that outright. Look how beautiful I am. Guys keep hitting on me all the time. I can't beat them off with a stick. That's how beautiful I am. Blah, blah, blah. She wants to frame it in something, you know. Hey, guys, come on. My boyfriend's right there. You keep hitting on me. What's another example? Similar to the first one. They kept me on stage what felt like an eternity. I probably looked like an idiot. Seems humble, but people are like, oh, what are you on the stage for? Oh, you won? You won an award? You were given an honor? You were given recognition? Well, that's great. Well, that's the original purpose, is to be able to tell people that, well, you know, they kept me on stage. They kept singing my praise. They kept talking about me. I didn't know what to do. I probably looked like an idiot. Humble brag right there. Classical example of humble brag. Another example, man, that paparazzi from TMZ just wouldn't leave me alone. And people are like, oh, you're famous? What are you famous for? You're a celebrity? I didn't know you were a celebrity. Wow. Is it a movie? Is it a song? You know, so humble brag right there. And then I think maybe one last example. My books are in a small niche, so I don't actually have that many readers. Okay, I admit that was me. What is the humble brag? Hey, everybody, I'm an author. Look up to me, I'm an author. Author. Oh, but you know, it's in a small niche. I actually don't have that many. That's a humble brag right there. That's a manifestation of ego that's probably out of control. So Awareness of the Tao includes self-awareness to be able to tell when you're doing it yourself. So, challenge to everybody, next time you go on social media, think about what you are expressing to the world, to your friends. Are you trying to win their approval? Are you sharing a photo because you want to make sure people know what's going on with you? Or do you want to say, everybody look at this luxurious vacation that I'm on. Everybody look at me, I'm on this luxury resort. Look at my surroundings. I can afford all this. I can afford an expensive vacation. That's a humble brag. I think, probably a very common example is to disguise it as a complaint. Like, here we are at this 5-star resort, and yet, the porter who brought up our luggage, he didn't even say hello to me when I greeted him. What kind of service is this? Oh, kind of like a complaint, but it's actually like, everybody, I can afford this expensive vacation. Okay, so humble brag, insidious. This is one of the reasons why I say the ego management is one of the most difficult lessons in the Tao. And I think that's true for everybody. I know it's true for me. Let's keep it moving. We're at the very last line. So Tao sages discard that and take this. Now, from the perspective of Lao Tzu, this is like really clear. Lao Tzu is saying that, well, I just gave you all these examples. You shouldn't let your ego get out of control. You should identify with other people to understand what they're going through. But in translation, it can be pretty mystifying. When you get to the last line, let's discard that. Well, what is that? And take this. Well, what is this? So, discard ego manifestations in general. Ego manifestations is what causes the humble brag and also what causes the inability to recognize your privilege as a privilege. And sages also let go of trying to force other people to see things their way. And usually with the humble brag, you're trying to make people see you in a positive and flattering way. Oh, you won an award? Oh, you won the contest? And sages do not draw attention to their accomplishments. Now, the flip side is also that if people ask about them, they won't shy away and say, oh, no, I haven't done anything. They'll just talk about it, because if you go too much in the extreme in the other direction, that is false modesty. It's just as much a manifestation of your ego. So what do they take? So above all, sages hold on to and embrace what is real and natural, because the Tao is what's real and natural. So what does that mean? It means they pay attention to what is actually needed versus what is desired. It may or may not be what is desired. Sometimes what you desire, you don't actually need. That gets discarded. So overall, sages, you can recognize them because they're down to earth and they're approachable. You can talk to them about anything. They don't put on airs. And what else? We're getting toward the very end. That's good. Overall, everything above, everything that we have talked about so far, discarding ego manifestation, etc., embracing the Tao that is real and natural, that leads to a life of harmony. Okay, finally, we're ready for the paraphrase of 72. All right, so the first half. Now remember, if you recall to mind, the first half is all about the people and the ruler. So the ruler should not reject their livelihood, meaning to understand them, accept them, and when you have that mutual acceptance, it leads to a life of harmony. That's what we're talking about here. So what about the paraphrase? What can we say to bring this into sharper focus? ruler who mistreats the subjects will eventually get to a point when people have had enough and lose their fear of the tyrant's power. They bring about an even greater force in an uprising. This is why the ruler should not limit the people's freedom and not live in ignorance of the way they live. Similarly, if you keep trying to force your way on others, eventually they will be fed up and pushed back. This is why you should avoid bossing people around and try to see things from their perspective. Only when you accept them as being in the same level as yourself will you have a chance of being accepted by them. I mean, truly accepted as one of them. And that's what we really want. Now, we go from this right here to the bottom half, which is about the behavior of the sages. They don't glorify themselves. They don't praise themselves. They discard ego manifestations. They embrace the Tao. So what can we do for the paraphrase? Let's take a look. This is why sages follow the Tao in the way they treat others and themselves. They have self-awareness, so they never flaunt or put themselves on display, intentionally or otherwise. They respect themselves, but not so much that they place their own needs ahead of other people in an egotistic way. In general, they discard the illusory desires of the world and affirm the genuine Tao in life. This is how they attain lasting peace and harmony. So guys, I think you will be able to tell from the paraphrase that everything in this chapter ties together. So we're at the very end of our discussion on 72. We've had our examples of humble brags and privilege and so forth. Moving on, we will be getting into 73, and I, of course, will be happy to take whatever questions people may have. Let me just check real quick, make sure I'm not missing something. And by the way, I think the audio quality has been uniformly good. It doesn't seem like we've had any static or audio cutouts today. All right. So here's what we'll do. I'm going to spend a moment on a quick preview of 73. Then we're going to need to go back to the summary for 72. The summary for 72 is going to be the same one that I presented last time because it had a lot to do with privileges and humble brags. I was hoping last time to get to those examples. We didn't have enough time. So now that we've had those examples, I want to present the summary once again because I think you will identify with them more. They will mean something this time. But for now, though, let's do a quick preview. This is just getting us all set up for next time. So let's talk about 73. And I'll give some preliminary comments on that. So 73, what does it say? The bold in daring will be killed. The bold in not daring will survive. Of these two, one may benefit, the other may harm. The one hated by heaven, who knows the reason? Even the sages still find this difficult. The Tao of heaven does not contend and yet excels in winning, does not speak and yet excels in responding, is not summoned and yet comes on its own, is unhurried and yet excels in planning, The heavenly net is vast, loose, and yet does not let anything slip through. So we'll talk about this in great detail over the next couple of meetings. I want to point out the heavenly net in line 11. That's central to this chapter. The heavenly net is the original Tao expression depicting something like the concept of karma. So in karma, in the way that karma works, in our modern understanding, you know that what goes around comes around. If you do something bad, it's going to come back to you, and it will probably be amplified. But in a similar way, you do something good, it'll come back to you, and it'll probably be amplified. Now, things are complicated by the fact that this is what the Tao teaches. This is also my personal belief that the working of the heavenly net and karma is not limited to a single lifetime. So that which comes back eventually may not be in this lifetime, although oftentimes it is not only in this lifetime, but right away. So for those of you who are wondering about some examples to see about this kind of instant karma that I am describing, all you have to do is to go to YouTube and type in instant karma. You will see endless examples of people getting that instant karma inflicted back on themselves. So it's real. And I also believe that there's an overall universal cosmic balance. So there's no such thing in my mind that, oh, you know, he died in his sleep after leading a life of wickedness and evil. He got away with it. I say no such thing. We have no idea what is awaiting this person in the next life. That's my personal belief. And I do recognize, I realize, and I appreciate not everybody can accept the possibility of multiple lifetimes, but that's what is taught in the Tao, and that's also what I believe personally. So this is the quick preview that I want to offer. Now let me jump straight to this slide here that you see every time. The spiritual path of the Guandao cultivation is open to all. So be sure to let us know if you feel it may be the right time for you to seek and receive the Tao. Now, let's take another look at the same summary that I provided before on summary 2. So, two big things: privilege awareness. So after my additional talk on privilege today, hopefully you will look at discussions of privilege in a completely different way. When someone brings it up, rather than to react in anger, I would challenge you to see if you can understand what the other person is going through or has gone through. So just to make that more real, I know for myself that when I interact with a police officer, I can have complete expectation that the officer is not gonna shoot me. Okay, is that a privilege? Yes, it is. I have to admit that's a privilege that I have. I'm grateful for that. And I also want to understand and empathize and identify with people who don't have that privilege. And just look around at all the conveniences that we have, all the good things in our lives. Let's not take them for granted. Let's be grateful for them. And the second big thing is humble brag, because this is such a manifestation of ego. I really want to emphasize it for everyone. Have you inadvertently engaged in this behavior without realizing it? I don't want to stop anyone from doing anything. So this is not to say you should, stop being engaged in social media completely. No, that is not what I'm saying. I am saying have the clarity, have the self-awareness to know what you're doing when you're doing it. Is it to brag? That's the question. So think it through, set up a humble brag filter for yourself. When you hit enter for a post on social media, that is the time to take another look and make sure that you are not doing it for ego-related reasons. I see so many people posting for exactly that, ego-related reasons, to inflate the self, to pump up the self, to show off, to get attention. So let me challenge you to think it through before actually engaging in the same behavior. So that is my summary for 72 today, and it brings us with just a couple more minutes to spare to our meeting ending ritual today. Let's go ahead and do it together.
起立，面向佛堂，持架三鞠躬，一鞠躬，再鞠躬，三鞠躬，持架规则是一鞠躬，接班一鞠躬。Okay, everybody, we are done.